The enormous alien ships appeared without warning, 7 of them, each larger than the biggest aircraft carrier on Earth. They hung in the sky above major cities across the planet. The world held its breath. 3 days passed before they made contact. Every screen on Earth suddenly showed the same image. A tall, gray-skinned being with 4 eyes and a mouth that seemed too wide for its face. "People of Earth," it said in perfect English. "I am High Commander Zelthur of the Galactic Coalition. We have been observing your world for some time." Frank Calloway watched the broadcast from the cramped common room of Mars Outpost Alpha. At 42, he was older than most of the Marines stationed there. His weathered face remained expressionless as the alien continued speaking. "We come to offer you protection and guidance. The universe is filled with dangers your primitive species cannot imagine." One of the younger Marines snorted. "Primitive? We've colonized Mars, haven't we?" Frank said nothing, his eyes fixed on the screen. He noticed details others might miss. The way the alien's secondary eyes constantly scanned, the almost imperceptible armor beneath its ceremonial robes, the careful framing that prevented viewers from seeing anything useful in the background. Colonel Patricia Wright entered the room, her face grim. "Attention," she said, and everyone stood. "As of now, we're on high alert. No communications with Earth except through official channels." "Ma'am," Frank said, "permission to speak freely?" Wright nodded. She had known Frank for 15 years. Through 2 wars on Earth, she trusted his instincts. "These aliens aren't here to help us," Frank said simply. "Look at their posture, their choice of words. They're conquerors, not allies." Wright frowned. "That's a serious accusation, Major." "Just calling it as I see it, ma'am." The next day, Earth's leaders gathered in New York to meet with alien representatives. Frank and the other Mars personnel watched as world leaders looked small and awkward. Next to the towering aliens, Zelthur addressed the assembly. "Your species has potential, but you are weak. Your bodies break easily. Your technology is primitive. Your lifespans are short. But the Coalition protects developing species like yours from greater threats." Frank leaned forward when Zelthur mentioned greater threats. The alien offered no details about these supposed dangers. "In exchange for our protection, we ask only for reasonable access to your resources and your assistance with certain tasks suited to your unique biology." The President of the United States asked, "And if we decline your generous offer?" Zelthur's wide mouth formed what might have been a smile. "Then we would regretfully leave you to face the universe alone. We recently observed the extinction of a species that made that choice. Their world is now uninhabitable." The message was clear to everyone watching. 3 weeks later, Frank found himself on Earth as part of a security detail for the treaty signing ceremony. The Mars base had been ordered to send representatives, and Colonel Wright had specifically requested Frank. "Keep your opinions to yourself," she had told him before they left. "But keep your eyes open." The ceremony took place in a massive tent outside the United Nations building. Alien guards stood at regular intervals, their armor now clearly visible. They carried weapons that looked like curved metallic spines. Frank stood at his post, watching as world leaders prepared to sign the document that would make Earth a protected member of the Galactic Coalition. His face revealed nothing, but his mind cataloged everything: the number of alien guards, the way they moved in Earth's gravity, how they reacted to loud noises. During a break in the ceremony, Frank stepped outside for air. He noticed one of the smaller aliens working on a piece of equipment nearby. "Does that power coupling give you trouble in this atmosphere?" Frank asked casually. The alien looked up, surprised. She, Frank guessed from the voice, seemed younger than the others. "You know about atmospheric interference with plasma conduits?" she asked. Frank shrugged. "Just an educated guess. I'm Frank, by the way." "Zara," the alien replied. "Technical specialist, 3rd class." She seemed to hesitate, then added, "Most humans avoid talking to us." "I'm not most humans," Frank said, "and I'm curious about your people." Zara worked as they talked. Frank learned that the coalition included 12 species. that Earth was the first new world they had found in 50 years, and that coalition ships could travel faster than light, but required enormous energy to do so. Your species is physically fragile compared to most coalition races, Zara said matter-of-factly. But you adapt quickly. The High Command finds that interesting. Interesting how? Frank asked. Before Zara could answer, a shadow fell over them. A much larger alien in ornate armor stood there, its 4 eyes fixed on Frank. Technical specialist, it said sharply to Zara. You are needed elsewhere. Zara quickly gathered her tools and left without looking at Frank. The larger alien stared at Frank. Humans should focus on their assigned tasks, soldier. Frank nodded respectfully, but his eyes remained steady. Just getting some air, sir. Later, back inside, Frank watched, as Earth's surrender was formalized with handshakes and forced smiles. The treaty would allow coalition forces to establish bases on Earth, the Moon, and Mars. It would give them control over all space travel and advanced technology development. Earth would provide resources and labor in exchange for protection. That night, in his temporary quarters, Frank reviewed the recordings he had secretly made using a small device hidden in his uniform. He studied the aliens' movements, their reactions, their equipment. He focused particularly on how they responded to Earth's environment, the subtle signs of discomfort in bright sunlight, their frequent use of breathing filters. Colonel Wright knocked on his door just after midnight. You should be sleeping, Major, she said, but her expression told him she wasn't surprised to find him working. Something's not right about these greater threats, ma'am, Frank said. They never give specifics. Classic intimidation tactic. Wright sat down heavily in the room's only chair. I know, but what can we do? Their technology is centuries beyond ours. Frank's face remained calm, but his eyes had the intensity that Wright recognized from past battles. Technology isn't everything, Colonel. Every species has weaknesses. We just need to find theirs. Wright studied him for a long moment. You're thinking like a soldier, Frank. I need you to think like a diplomat right now. We have our orders. Yes, ma'am, Frank said. But as Wright left, both of them knew that Frank Calloway didn't take orders that didn't make sense. And surrendering Earth to alien control made no sense at all. The next day, as Frank prepared to return to Mars, he spotted Zara again, working alone on a shuttle. Your superior didn't seem happy to see us talking, Frank said, approaching carefully. Zara glanced around before responding. Commander Vex doesn't approve of unnecessary interaction with protected species. Protected, Frank repeated. Is that what we are? Zara hesitated. That's the official designation. And unofficially? Zara's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. I should not say more. But you want to, Frank observed. After a long pause, Zara said, quietly, not all coalition members agree with the current leadership's methods. Some of us believe in true partnership between species. Frank nodded slowly. I'd like to hear more about that sometime. Perhaps on Mars, Zara said. I'm being transferred to your outpost next month. As Frank boarded the transport back to Mars, his mind was already forming plans. The aliens had technology and strength, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity. They had underestimated Frank Calloway. 6 months passed. Earth was no longer truly Earth. The coalition had taken over quickly and completely. Their ships now filled the skies. Their soldiers walked the streets of every major city. Their bases dominated the Moon and Mars. Frank Calloway stood at the viewing window of Mars Outpost Alpha, watching coalition ships unload new equipment. The once proud human base now served mostly as housing for Earth workers, who maintained the much larger coalition facilities nearby. Major, a voice said behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Olivia Sanchez. At 35, she was one of the few officers who had stayed on Mars after the coalition took control. Got something? Frank asked quietly. Olivia nodded and handed him a small data tablet. Another 3 people missing from Mining Section 5, that makes 17 this month. Frank looked at the names and images. All under 30, all in excellent health. Just like the others, Olivia confirmed. For months, Frank had been collecting information on humans who disappeared from work details. The Coalition always had explanations: transfers, accidents, returns to Earth. But the patterns bothered him. "We need to get inside their research facility," Frank said. Olivia frowned. "That's suicide, Frank. The security there is—" "I know what their security is like," Frank interrupted. "I've been watching for 6 months. They rotate guards every 8 hours. The sensors have a 3-second delay when switching between thermal and motion detection, and technical specialist Zara has been very helpful with information, whether she realizes it or not." Zara had indeed been transferred to Mars, as she'd mentioned. Over the past months, Frank had carefully built a friendship with her, learning about Coalition technology and protocols through casual conversations. Later that night, Frank made his move. He wore a maintenance uniform and carried tools as he approached the smaller side entrance of the Coalition research facility. He had timed his approach perfectly. The guard shift was changing, and Zara had mentioned a routine system check that would briefly affect security sensors. Frank slipped inside, moving confidently as if he belonged there. Coalition members rarely looked closely at human workers. They all looked the same to alien eyes. The facility was massive, with high ceilings to accommodate the taller aliens. Frank followed the path he had memorized from maintenance schematics Olivia had obtained. 3 levels down, the corridors became narrower and the lighting dimmer. Frank heard voices ahead, the strange melodic language of the Coalition. He ducked into a side room until they passed. The room was filled with containers labeled in alien script. Frank recognized some characters from his studies. The labels indicated biological materials. Moving deeper into the facility, Frank finally reached a secured door marked with red symbols that Zara had once translated as specialized research. Using a stolen access card, he entered. What he saw inside froze his blood. Humans, at least 20, were suspended in clear tubes filled with greenish liquid. They appeared unconscious, with various tubes and wires connected to their bodies. Alien researchers moved between the tubes, taking readings and samples. Frank recorded everything with a tiny camera hidden in his tool belt. He needed evidence. As he watched, one researcher extracted a long needle from a young man's chest. The human's body convulsed, though his eyes remained closed. Frank's hand instinctively moved toward his concealed knife, but he forced himself to remain hidden. Attacking now would save no one. As he prepared to retreat, an alarm suddenly blared. Frank wasn't sure if he had triggered it or if it was unrelated, but he knew he needed to leave immediately. He headed toward a different exit, hoping to avoid the main security response. As he rounded a corner, he came face to face with 3 Coalition guards. They were each nearly 7 feet tall, wearing the light armor used for internal security. "Human," one barked in English. "Identify yourself." Frank raised his tools. "Maintenance. Section 12. There's a leak in the cooling system." The guard's 4 eyes narrowed. No maintenance was scheduled. Frank knew further lies were pointless. He dropped his tools and attacked. The aliens were stronger, much stronger, but Frank had been studying their movements for months. They had evolved on a high-gravity world, making them powerful but somewhat slow in Earth-normal conditions. Frank used this to his advantage, striking at joints and sensory organs. The first guard fell when Frank landed a precise blow to the breathing apparatus at its neck, a vulnerability Zara had unknowingly revealed during a casual discussion of Coalition physiology. The second guard managed to strike Frank hard enough to send him sprawling, but Frank rolled and came up behind the alien, using his knife to sever the neural connector at the base of its skull, another detail gleaned from maintenance work he had observed. The third guard called for backup, but Frank silenced it with a thrown tool that struck directly between its primary eyes, disorienting it long enough for Frank to close the distance and finish the fight. Breathing heavily, Frank collected his recording device and fled through the maintenance tunnels. By the time he reached the human quarters, Coalition forces were on full alert. Colonel Wright was waiting in his room. One look at her face told Frank she knew what he had done. "You stupid, reckless fool," she said, but there was no real anger in her voice. Did you find anything? Frank connected his recording device to a secure terminal. As the images appeared, Wright's expression hardened. Those bastards, she whispered. They told us the missing workers were being transferred. They're experimenting on us, Frank said, testing our physical limits, our adaptability. I'm not sure why. Wright was silent for a long moment. This changes everything, but what can we do? A direct confrontation would be suicide. The Coalition's technology and weapons are too advanced. Frank nodded. We don't fight them directly, not yet. First, we need to understand them better. Every species has weaknesses. And how do we do that? We need a scientist, Frank said. Someone who understands alien biology, and I know just the person. The next day, while Coalition forces were still searching for the intruder who had breached their facility, Frank and Olivia left Mars on a supply ship bound for Earth. Their official orders, signed by Colonel Wright, listed them as security for a routine supply run. Their real mission was to find Dr. Alan Morgan, a xenobiologist who had been among the first to study Coalition physiology before being removed from the official research team for asking too many questions. As the small ship broke Mars' orbit, Frank looked out at the Coalition mothership looming over Earth like a predator. They think we're weak, he said quietly. That's their first mistake. Olivia checked their course. And their second mistake? Frank's eyes remained fixed on the alien vessel. They took our people. No one does that to humans and survives. Earth looked different now. Coalition structures rose like strange metal trees among human buildings. Alien ships constantly flew overhead. Coalition soldiers patrolled the streets, their tall forms making humans look like children beside them. Frank and Olivia moved carefully through Chicago, now called Earth Distribution Center 7 by the Coalition. They wore the gray uniforms of human workers, heads down like everyone else. There, Olivia said quietly, nodding toward a small apartment building. 3rd floor, according to our information. They found Dr. Alan Morgan's apartment and knocked. No answer. Frank knocked again, harder. The door finally opened. A thin man with unkempt gray hair and suspicious eyes looked out at them. Dr. Morgan? Frank asked. Depends who's asking, the man replied. Frank glanced around the empty hallway. My name is Major Frank Calloway. This is Lieutenant Olivia Sanchez. We're from Mars Outpost Alpha. Morgan's eyes widened slightly. Military? There is no human military anymore. Not officially, Frank agreed. May we come in? Once inside, Frank showed Morgan the recording from the Coalition research facility. The scientist watched without speaking, his face growing paler. I suspected. Something like this, Morgan said when the recording ended. That's why they removed me from the research team. I asked too many questions about their interest in human biology. What are they doing to those people? Olivia asked. Morgan ran a hand through his tangled hair. Testing our limits, our adaptability. You see, the Coalition species evolved on high-gravity worlds with thick atmospheres. Their bodies are stronger than ours, but less flexible. Flexible how? Frank asked. In every way, Morgan said. Their cellular structure, their immune systems, their ability to adapt to new environments. He pointed to his small kitchen table, covered with makeshift laboratory equipment. I've been continuing my research in secret. Look at this. He showed them microscope slides with alien cell samples. Coalition species have very little genetic variation. They're stronger than us, yes, but they're also more vulnerable to certain types of radiation, bacteria, and viruses that humans have lived with for millennia. Frank leaned forward. You're saying they have weaknesses we could exploit? Potentially, Morgan nodded. But their technology still far surpasses ours. Any direct confrontation would... A loud bang interrupted him as the apartment door burst open. 4 Coalition soldiers rushed in, weapons raised. Step away from the human scientist, one ordered. This research is unauthorized. Frank moved instantly, using the kitchen table as a shield. Olivia dove for their bags, pulling out the small stun weapons they had smuggled from Mars. Get the samples. Morgan shouted, grabbing a case from beneath the table. Frank tackled the nearest alien, using the close quarters to negate the creature's superior strength. Olivia fired her stun weapon at another, hitting it in the breathing apparatus. The alien dropped, gasping. "This way," Morgan shouted, revealing a hidden door behind a bookshelf. "Service corridor." Frank and Olivia followed, firing behind them, to slow the pursuit. They raced down narrow stairs and through a maze of maintenance tunnels. "I prepared for this," Morgan panted as they ran. "Been expecting them for weeks." They emerged 3 blocks away and quickly blended into a crowd of human workers heading to their shifts. Coalition alarms blared in the distance. Hours later, they reached a small cabin outside the city. Morgan had stocked it with supplies and more research equipment. "We should be safe here for a while," he said. "This area has mineral deposits that interfere with their scanners." Frank examined the case Morgan had saved. It contained slides, data tablets, and several vials of liquid. "What exactly have you discovered?" he asked. Morgan held up one of the vials. "This is a compound that affects Coalition physiology. It disrupts their cellular function when exposed to certain radiation frequencies that are harmless to humans." "A weapon?" Olivia asked. "A tool," Morgan corrected. "One that could level the playing field, but deploying it would require access to their environmental systems, likely on their mothership." Frank considered this. "So we need to get aboard the mothership." "That's impossible," Morgan said. "Security there is absolute." "Nothing's impossible," Frank replied. "And I think I know how to do it." Later that night, as Morgan slept, Olivia joined Frank outside. He was looking up at the stars, partially blocked by the massive shape of the Coalition mothership in orbit. "You're thinking about her, aren't you?" Olivia asked. "That alien technician you mentioned." Frank nodded. "Zara. She's different from the others. She questions things. Can you trust her?" "No," Frank admitted. "But I understand her. She wants to do what's right, even if it goes against her leaders." Olivia sighed. "What's your plan, Frank?" "The Coalition is planning something big. Those experiments aren't just scientific curiosity, they're preparing for something." Frank turned to face her. "I need to get captured." "What?" "That's suicide. Captured humans are taken to the mothership for processing before being sent to the research facilities. If I get captured during one of the public protests, I'll be taken directly to the ship." "And then what?" Olivia demanded. "You'll be alone, unarmed, surrounded by enemies." "Not alone," Frank said. "You and Morgan will work with Colonel Wright to prepare the compound and find a way to transmit the right frequency once I'm in position." Olivia shook her head. "This is crazy." "It's the only way," Frank insisted. "Morgan's compound could work, but someone needs to deploy it from inside." Their discussion was interrupted by an emergency broadcast on all channels. The Coalition High Commander appeared on screen. "People of Earth," Zelthor announced, "due to increasing resource needs, the Coalition has decided to implement a partial evacuation plan. 20 million humans will be relocated to make room for Coalition settlers. This is a necessary step for Earth's continued protection." Frank and Olivia stared at the screen in shock. "They're not just exploiting us," Olivia whispered. "They're replacing us." Frank's expression hardened. "We need to contact Wright, and we need to move fast." The next morning, Frank prepared a secure communication to Mars, while Morgan continued working on his compound. "We'll need someone with technical skills for the transmission," Morgan said. "Someone who understands both human and Coalition communication systems." "I know just the person," Frank replied. "Greg Winters. He's still on Mars, working in communications." As Frank finalized his plan, Coalition ships began landing in major cities worldwide, ready to start the relocation process. Reports of resistance were met with immediate and brutal suppression. Time was running out for humanity. Frank knew his plan was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but watching Coalition forces round up humans like cattle strengthened his resolve. "I'll join the protest in Denver tomorrow," he told Olivia and Morgan. "That should get me captured and sent to the mothership." Olivia gripped his arm. "Frank, there has to be another way." If there is, we don't have time to find it, he said, looking up at the mothership looming in the sky. Sometimes one soldier is all it takes. The protest in Denver grew larger than expected. Thousands of humans filled the streets shouting and holding signs against the coalition's relocation plan. Coalition soldiers formed lines, their tall figures imposing against the human crowd. Frank moved through the protesters, making himself visible. He wore no disguise. If his plan was to work, he needed to be recognized. He pushed to the front of the crowd, directly facing the alien soldiers. "We won't be your lab rats anymore," Frank shouted louder than the others. He held up a tablet showing images from the research facility. "We know what you're doing to us." The crowd grew louder around him. Frank continued shouting, drawing attention. It didn't take long before coalition officers pointed him out. 6 soldiers moved toward him through the crowd. Frank didn't resist when they grabbed him. That was part of the plan. As they dragged him away, he caught a glimpse of Olivia watching, from a distance. Their eyes met briefly before he was pushed into a transport vehicle. Inside the vehicle, Frank was restrained and scanned. A coalition officer examined the results. "This one is on the alert list," the officer said. "Priority transport to the Dominion for interrogation." Frank kept his expression neutral, but inwardly he felt a small victory. The Dominion was the coalition mothership. Phase 1 of his plan had worked. The transport lifted off, heading for orbit. Through a small window, Frank watched Earth grow, smaller below. The enormous shape of the Dominion filled the view as they approached. Up close, the mothership was even more massive than it appeared from Earth. The transport docked in one of many bays along the ship's hull. Frank was marched through the docking area, surrounded by coalition guards. The interior of the Dominion was unlike anything Frank had seen. Corridors stretched in all directions, filled with aliens of various ranks. The air felt different, heavier, with a slight sweet smell that made Frank's throat itch. They took him to a holding area where other captured humans waited. Most sat in silence, eyes down. Frank scanned the room carefully, memorizing the layout, noting the positions of guards and surveillance devices. After several hours, Frank was taken to an interrogation room. A coalition officer entered, taller than the guards and wearing more elaborate armor. "Human," the officer said, "you have been identified as a disruptive element. Your actions at Mars Research Facility and your subsequent escape have been troublesome." Frank said nothing. "You were found with unauthorized images of coalition research," the officer continued. "This is a serious violation of protection protocols." Frank looked directly at the alien. "Why are you experimenting on us?" The officer seemed surprised by the direct question. "Your species is being studied for its own protection." "Protection?" Frank repeated. "Is that what you call taking our people and testing their limits until they die?" "Your understanding is limited," the officer said dismissively. "The coalition has encountered many species. All must be categorized according to their usefulness." "Usefulness for what?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a button on his wrist device. Frank felt a sharp pain in his head, as something activated in the room, some kind of neural scanner. "Your resistance is noted," the officer said, "but ultimately meaningless. You will tell us about your collaborators." Frank endured hours of questioning. The neural scanner made it difficult to lie, but Frank had been trained to resist interrogation. He focused on partial truths, on memories, of Mars before the coalition arrived, on anything except Olivia, Morgan, and their plan. When the session ended, Frank was exhausted but satisfied. He had revealed nothing important, and he was still aboard the Dominion. He was taken to a different holding area, one with individual cells. Through the clear barrier of his cell, Frank could see dozens of similar cells, most containing humans. Some wore tattered civilian clothes, others wore work uniforms. All looked scared and defeated. Frank studied the cell systems carefully. The barriers appeared to be energy fields rather than physical materials. The controls were outside each cell, operated by guards. Most importantly, Frank noticed that the environmental systems for the prison section ran through visible conduits in the ceiling, exactly the kind of access he needed. That night, as the ship's lighting dimmed to simulate night, Frank felt a subtle vibration in the small communication device hidden under the skin behind his ear. Morgan had designed it to be undetectable by Coalition scanners. "Frank?" Greg Winter's voice came through faintly. "Can you acknowledge?" Frank tapped the device once with his tongue. A simple yes. "Good." Greg continued. "Colonel Wright has coordinated with Olivia and Morgan. The compound is ready. We've hacked into the ship's system enough to send you schematics." Frank's head, filled with images, deck plans, system layouts, access points. The information came in bursts, flooding his vision temporarily before his brain processed and stored it. "We've located Olivia," Greg said. "She's in Research Section 7, 2 decks above you, still alive, but they've started testing." Frank tapped twice. "Understood. The central environmental system is on Deck 12. That's where you need to release." "Morgan's compound. We'll transmit the activating frequency once you confirm deployment." Frank examined the schematics in his mind. Getting to Olivia and then to Deck 12 would be difficult but not impossible. The ship was huge, with many maintenance passages and service tunnels designed for smaller worker aliens. "One more thing," Greg added. "We've detected unusual activity in the Coalition fleet. Multiple ships are preparing for something big. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." Frank tapped twice again. "Good luck, Major," Greg said before the communication ended. Frank waited until the guard patrol passed his cell, then examined the small access panel near the floor. According to the schematics, it connected to a waste management system that ran throughout this section. It was too small for most Coalition species, but not for a human. Working silently, Frank loosened the panel. Years of mechanical work on Mars made the task easier than it might have been. When the panel came free, he saw a narrow passage beyond. He waited for the right moment when the guard patrol was at the far end of the corridor. Then he squeezed through the opening, replacing the panel behind him. The passage was tight and dark. Frank crawled through it, following the mental map from Greg's transmission. He moved carefully, avoiding sensor nodes where the schematics indicated they would be. After what felt like hours of crawling through increasingly small spaces, Frank reached a junction that opened into a larger maintenance corridor. Here he could stand, though he had to hunch slightly under the low ceiling. Frank moved quickly now, working his way toward Research Section 7. He had to find Olivia first. Then together they would reach the environmental systems and deploy Morgan's compound. As Frank reached the access point to Research Section 7, he heard voices on the other side, Coalition researchers discussing their work in their melodic language. Frank understood enough to make out key phrases: human adaptability, impressive resistance, suitable for the purpose. Frank pressed against the wall as a door opened nearby. Through the narrow gap, he saw something that chilled his blood. Beyond the researchers was a larger chamber where dozens of humans hung suspended in the same green liquid he had seen on Mars. But this operation was much bigger, and at the far end of the chamber stood High Commander Zell Thur himself, examining the results on a large display. Frank's jaw tightened. Whatever the Coalition was planning, the highest levels of leadership were involved. This wasn't just scientific curiosity. The Coalition had a specific purpose for humanity, and Frank was determined to find out what it was. Frank waited patiently until the researchers left the main chamber. Only 2 guards remained, positioned at the entrance. He needed to get past them to reach Olivia and the other captives. Frank checked his pocket for the small device Morgan had given him. It was a simple thing, just a cylinder with a button, but Morgan promised it would temporarily disrupt Coalition sensory systems. Frank pressed the button and tossed the device into the corridor. It made a soft clicking sound, then released, a high-pitched noise that humans couldn't hear. The guards immediately put their hands to their heads, disoriented. Frank moved quickly. He struck the first guard at the base of the neck where their breathing apparatus connected. The alien dropped without a sound. The second guard managed to reach for a weapon, but Frank was faster. A sharp blow to the guard's primary eyes stunned it long enough for Frank to knock it unconscious. Inside the chamber, Frank moved between the suspended humans. Each floated in a tube of green liquid, connected to machines that monitored their vital signs. Frank checked the names displayed on each tube until he found Olivia. She looked pale but alive. Frank examined the control panel on her tube. Using what he had learned from Zara about Coalition technology, he carefully disconnected the monitoring systems, then activated the emergency drain sequence. The green liquid drained from Olivia's tube. As the last of it emptied, the tube opened. Olivia fell forward and Frank caught her. She coughed violently, expelling liquid from her lungs. "Frank?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I've got you," Frank said. "Can you walk?" Olivia nodded weakly. "The others?" "No time," Frank said. "We need to reach the environmental controls. Then we can free everyone." Frank helped Olivia to her feet. He gave her one of the guards' weapons and they headed for the exit. But as they reached the door, it slid open. Zara stood there, her 4 eyes wide with surprise. "Frank?" she said. "What are you doing here?" Frank raised his weapon, but something in Zara's posture stopped him. She wasn't calling for guards. She wasn't raising an alarm. "You knew about this," Frank said, gesturing to the humans in tubes. "You knew what they were doing to us." Zara's eyes lowered. "Not at first. When I found out, I've been helping others escape. Not many, but some." Frank studied her. "Why?" "Because this is wrong," Zara said simply. "The Coalition was meant to protect species, not exploit them." Frank made a decision. "We're heading to the Central Environmental System. We have a way to stop this." "I can help you get there," Zara said. "But we must hurry. The High Command is accelerating the project." "What project?" Olivia asked, still leaning on Frank for support. Zara looked around nervously. "They call it the Adaptability Initiative. They're not just studying humans. They're trying to incorporate human adaptability into their own species." "What does that mean?" Frank asked. "They're creating hybrids," Zara explained, "taking human genetic material and combining it with their own. The experiments are to find the strongest, most adaptable human specimens." "For what purpose?" Olivia demanded. "War," Zara said quietly. "There is no greater threat, as they claimed. The Coalition is the greatest threat in this part of the galaxy. They conquer species and take what they need, but they've reached a limit. Their bodies cannot adapt to certain environments. They need humanity's adaptability to continue expanding." Frank absorbed this information. So everything, the protection treaties, the relocation, it was all to study and harvest us. "Yes," Zara admitted, "and the process begins in earnest today. The High Commander is preparing to address the fleet." Frank looked at Olivia. "We need to move, now." The 3 of them moved through service corridors, avoiding patrols. Zara's knowledge of the ship proved invaluable. They reached Deck 12 without being detected. The Central Environmental Control Room was smaller than Frank expected. Just a circular chamber with a series of control panels surrounding a central column. "This regulates atmosphere throughout the ship," Zara explained. "If your compound works, it will affect everyone aboard." Frank removed a small vial from a hidden pocket in his boot. The liquid inside was clear, almost like water. Morgan had assured him it would work, but only if activated by the right frequency. Frank poured the liquid into an intake valve on the central column. "Now we need to transmit the signal to activate it." "The communication array is there," Zara said, pointing to a console. As Frank moved toward it, the door slid open. High Commander Zelthur himself stood there, flanked by 4 elite guards. "The troublesome human," Zelthur said, his wide mouth forming what might have been a smile. "And our own traitor, Zara. How disappointing." The guards raised their weapons, but Zelthur gestured for them to wait. "I'm curious, human," the High Commander said to Frank. "What did you hope to accomplish here? Your species is weak. Your technology is primitive, yet you persist in this pointless resistance." Frank faced the alien leader calmly. "You keep saying we're weak, but you need us, don't you? You need what makes us human." Zelthur's expression changed slightly. "We need certain genetic traits. Yes, your adaptability is useful, And these greater threats you warned us about? Frank asked. They don't exist, do they? A moment of silence filled the room before Zelthur replied. There are always threats in the universe, human. We simply ensure we remain the greatest one. During this exchange, Frank had been slowly moving toward the communication console. Now, he lunged for it, pressing the emergency transmission button that would connect directly to Mars Outpost Alpha. The guards fired, but Frank had already sent the signal. A beam struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to the floor, clutching his wound. Zelthur approached him slowly. A brave but futile gesture. Whatever you've done will be undone. I don't think so, Frank said through gritted teeth. A soft tone sounded throughout the ship. The ventilation system hummed as it cycled air through the entire vessel. Nothing seemed to happen at first. Then one of the guards stumbled. Another put a hand to its throat. Zelthur himself blinked, his four eyes rapidly. What have you done? The High Commander demanded, his voice suddenly weaker. Leveled the playing field, Frank replied. The compound was working, affecting the Coalition aliens just as Morgan had predicted. Their cellular structure was breaking down, weakened by the frequency transmitted from Mars. Zelthur fell to his knees. This is impossible. Your species is too primitive. That's where you made your mistake, Frank said, standing despite his injury. You thought physical strength was the only kind of strength. But humanity's real strength is here, he tapped his head, and here, he placed a hand over his heart. As Zelthur weakened further, Frank moved to the ship's main communication system. With Zara's help, he activated the broadcast function that would transmit to all Coalition ships and bases. This is Major Frank, Calloway of Earth, he said into the transmitter. The Coalition has lied to you. There is no greater threat. They've conquered dozens of species using the same tactics of fear and false protection, Frank continued, revealing everything about the experiments, the true purpose of the protection treaties, and the adaptability initiative. We don't want war, Frank concluded, but we will not be harvested. We will not be experiments. Earth is our home, and humanity will defend it. As the message went out, Coalition forces throughout the solar system began to collapse, affected by the same compound now circulating through the Dominion. On Earth, on the Moon, on Mars, the once mighty aliens were suddenly vulnerable. Colonel Wright, coordinating with resistance cells globally, launched simultaneous attacks on weakened Coalition bases. Humans who had been forced to serve as workers suddenly became liberators. On the Dominion, Frank helped Olivia free the captive humans. Zara assisted, along with other Coalition members who had secretly opposed the High Command's methods. In the HFY Command Center, Frank found Zelthur, barely conscious but still alive. You could have been our allies, Frank told the alien leader. Instead, you chose to be our masters. You cannot survive alone in this galaxy, Zelthur gasped. We won't be alone, Frank replied. We'll build real alliances, based on mutual respect, not fear and domination. 3 months later, Frank stood at a podium in the rebuilt United Nations building. Representatives from Earth sat alongside delegates from Coalition worlds who had chosen to form a new alliance with humanity. We were mocked for our weakness, Frank said to the assembly. But we proved that true strength comes in many forms. Humanity stands ready to join the galactic community, not as servants, not as masters, but as equals. As he spoke, Frank noticed Zara in the audience. She would return to her homeworld as an ambassador for the new alliance. Olivia sat with other military leaders, now tasked with developing Earth's first true space defense force. Dr. Morgan had been appointed to lead a new institute for interspecies medical research. Frank looked out at the gathered humans and aliens. The universe is vast and often dangerous, but we face it stronger when we stand together. After the ceremony, Frank walked outside and looked up at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter somehow, full of promise rather than threat. One soldier had stood alone, But he hadn't remained alone for long, and now humanity would never stand alone again.